Types of auctions, absolute. Anybody know what absolute means?
Any price.
Any price, exactly. Selling regardless of price. Thank you. Absolute puts the most fear in the mind of the seller. Good comment? But you have to take a step back and think about the seller doesn't really control things in this process, the buyers control. It's all about buyer psychology. I'm sitting on the couch in Chicago. I see an auction advertised in Miami, new office building on Brickell. Wow, absolute auction. I know that the seller is serious. They are going to sell regardless of price. I'm going to take my time, which is very valuable to me as a Chicago executive, investor, whatever. I'm going to fly down to Miami. So I'm sitting on the couch in Chicago. Now I'm coming because I know the seller is serious, and I know if I go to that auction, all I have to do is outbid the next person on the floor, and I'm going to get that property. Absolute auction tends to bring more people. More property tours are shown during absolute auctions in our statistics. More people do web inquiries with us. We've only sold one property, and I'll get into that later, both absolute and reserve, actually in Fort Lauderdale, and the absolute way 5 years before the reserve method brought so much more money in an up market that the reserve price in an up market was like a couple $100,000 less after a 5-year run-up. Why? Because the people didn't come to the reserve, which is the next one. Now the reserve puts more confidence into the seller, right? Yes. There's two methods there that we have listed. Confidential reserve, meaning they have a contract with the auction company, the client. They have stated in our contract what their minimum reserve price is. If we hit that price, auction day, they are sold. We know they're sold, but we're driving obviously through that to get the highest money on the floor that day. But if we reach that minimum number, that's what it's going to be sold at if it stops there, or a higher number, hopefully, as we continue the bidding with all the bidders that have come. But you, the buyer, don't know that. So what happens is we will write up the contract at a reserve confidential, submit it to the seller for confirmation, and then they have the right to, they will sign it to if it's at that minimum bid or higher, but if it's lower than the minimum bid, the seller has the right to accept a price lower than what was stated in our contract. For instance, we bid something to $2 million. The reserve was 2.5. And so we did not hit the reserve, but here's the contract, Mr. Seller. We had the market here in our experience. Would you like to take this offer at $2 million? Yes or no? And so they have the right to accept or reject. On the published reserve auction, which some of you have this brochure, we have an auction coming up August 22nd in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. If you want to pass these around, that'd be great. Thank you. In here, you will see some published minimum prices, and they're also on our website. Basically, we're seeing this a lot more popular today because of the fear factor we were talking about earlier. So many people say, oh, if your property's worth $3 million, I don't want to sell it for $10,000 at auction. Well, on an absolute auction, they have that fear because they're selling regardless of price. Now, in our methodology, that has never happened. And the reason that never happened is we're actually just using a different method of marketing the property. We're not changing the inherent value that's already in the property. If that property is really worth $3 million or less, then it's going to go for that based on the buyer profile and how they bid to it. Will we get a bid at $10,000? Sure, but we're going to, so many bids come up to get to that price or close to it because of local, regional, and national marketing. But the fear and the perception is, I'm going to get this really low price. Now, banks today are really scared of that, thinking they're going to get that price at auction if they agree to it. So what they're more comfortable with in some situations, like this situation of the brochure going around, the seller was okay with an absolute auction for some of the units on those 58 condos in Myrtle Beach, and the rest would be reserved. But the lender said, no way, I'm not going to do absolute auction. So what we decided to do there was present an alternative plan on a published minimum reserve. So you'll see in this brochure, and this is condominiums, and I know we can do this for many different property types. We have 1 bedrooms starting at $69,000, 1's oceanfront on the sand in Myrtle Beach starting at $99,000. And by the way, if you have clients, you can be a buyer broker for those clients, bring them to the auction, represent them, and earn a commission. So in this case, again, the bank was really skeptical about doing absolute auction, but they did agree to say, okay, for a portion of the inventory, we're willing to accept this minimum price. And again, that's a starting bid. They have it in their fact that it's going to sell at that, but usually when you start there, you're going to go from 10, 20, 30% higher, somewhere in that range, depending on property type and buyer profile that's coming. Hybrid auction is where we have, I mentioned this earlier, just a few minutes ago, where we have several different parcels. Let's take land. Let's take commercial land, and we could break up that land into different parcels. What we might have is 10 tracts of land from this piece of property. What we would like to do is get the seller's consent from a sales map we would do to say, would you be willing to convey part of it if it all doesn't sell, to get some money out of the deal? And if they say yes, what we can do is, in this example, let's say they had 10 tracts in this parcel, or 10 parcels in this one big tract. If we had 5 absolute and 5 reserve, we would bid the absolute first, and then let the highest bidder choose which parcel they want to buy. And we would sell that underneath a method we'll see here called high bidder's choice. So everybody here is going to bid because you in the back know that the guy in the front wants the same piece of land you do, right? Wrong. But that's what the psychology is, because you know you have the best piece of property that you're going to buy. So everybody bids competitively for the right to choose first. And then whoever wins gets that piece of parcel. Then we do that for the first 5 tracts. Now, if the money is good for the seller as they're bidding, if the money averages out to where the seller wanted to be, we have a agreement with the seller to say, okay, if the money's holding, we want to add more tracts of land, those remaining 5 tracts, to the auction and convert what was once reserved to absolute. So we might say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, the seller has sold all the absolute units. He has no more obligation to sell anymore, but in this case, he has agreed in our conversation to sell 2 more units. Yeah, so and then the crowd is there, you know, because people come. You got 10 tracts of land, and there might be 40, 50 bidders there, yes, in a theoretical example. So we've sold 5. If there's 40 bidders, we have 35 bidders who didn't buy anything yet. So now we convert until we sell out. And we can do that for many different... the question was that in an auction, how many people come who are really realistic bidders? Well, it depends. We may not let everybody in the auction, number one, depending on what type of auction it is. So we have pre-qualification set. Typically, you know, let's say it's a $5 million property, you may have to put up a $50,000 deposit, cashier's check, to get a bid paddle, number one, to get into the auction, and then go from there. We're really a marketing company that happens to sell real estate at auction. The marketing campaign will drive the market there. How many people are going to show up? I don't know. But typically, we will draw from 8 to 14 states in most of our auctions. Sealed bid is a very unique type of auction method as well, where you have maybe a very specialized property. We had a golf course up in South Carolina years back where they played the Ryder Cup. You know, we knew that was a very specific buyer profile at the very tip of that buyer triangle. We did a sealed bid. We had like 3 bidders, and then we had a little competition between them after we received the sealed bids because they were very close, and then that was conveyed for $27 million.